You pick up your phone to check one tiny thing. A message, the time, one notification. Then suddenly, 20 minutes are gone. You have scrolled past advice, jokes, arguments, perfect bodies, perfect lives, people who seem completely certain about who they are. And somehow, after all that, you feel less clear than before. Not entertained, not free, just pulled. So here is the strange question. Why does having more freedom often make us feel more trapped? At first, the answer seems obvious. Too many options, too much noise, too much information. But the deeper answer is much more uncomfortable. Freedom scares us because it does not only give us choices, it makes us responsible for them. And that changes everything. Because the moment you realize your life is not just happening to you, you can no longer hide inside the script. You are not only following a path, you are making one. Every day, with your attention, with your silence, with what you avoid, with what you keep repeating when nobody is watching. That is why existentialism still hits so hard. Existentialism says your life does not arrive with a fixed meaning already stamped onto it. Meaning is not something you simply discover. It is something your choices slowly reveal. Not in a dramatic movie scene way, in the ordinary way. How you speak, who you forgive, what you tolerate, what you pretend not to know, what you keep choosing because it feels easier than changing. And that is where the fear begins. Jean-Paul Sartre called this feeling anguish. Not anguish like screaming into the rain, something quieter. The deep unease that comes when you realize, I am choosing. And even worse, my choices are shaping the person I am becoming. You choose the job, you stay in the relationship, you send the text, you do not send it, you tell the truth, you laugh along, you scroll again. Each moment seems small, but every small choice trains your life in a direction. And here is where it gets even stranger. The brain loves repetition. Psychology tells us that habits form when repeated actions become easier and more automatic. Your brain is trying to save energy, so it turns yesterday's choices into today's default settings. That is useful. It helps you survive, but it can also hide responsibility. Because once something feels automatic, you can tell yourself, this is just how I am. This is just my personality. This is just my life. But is it? Or is it a pattern you have practiced so many times that it started to feel like fate? Sartre had a name for this kind of escape. Bad faith. Bad faith is when you act as if you have no choice, even though somewhere inside, you know you do. It does not always sound like a lie. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. I have no other option. People like me do not do that. This is just the role I have to play. My past made me this way. And sometimes, yes, your past matters. Your limits matter. Your pain matters. Your circumstances matter. But when you turn those facts into a prison with no door, you are doing something very human. You are giving up freedom so you do not have to feel its weight. And the mind often helps you do it. Psychologists call one version of this avoidance. Avoidance is when you move away from what feels hard right now, even if that makes your life smaller later. You avoid the conversation, you numb the feeling, you stay busy, you keep scrolling, you say you're tired, but really, you're trying not to hear the question underneath everything. What am I doing with my life? Avoidance feels good at first. That's what makes it dangerous. It lowers the pressure for a moment. But then, the cost arrives. The unsaid thing grows. The unlived part of you grows. The choice you avoided doesn't disappear. It waits. And maybe this is why relief can sometimes be suspicious. Sometimes, relief doesn't mean you're safe. Sometimes it means you just successfully hid from yourself. There's also research that points in this direction. Barry Schwartz called it the paradox of choice. The idea is simple. More options do not always make us happier. Sometimes they make us anxious, doubtful, and less satisfied with whatever we choose. Because every option you don't choose stays alive in your imagination. The life you didn't live, the job you didn't take, the person you didn't become, the message you didn't send. Freedom expands possibility, but it also expands regret, comparison, self-blame. Because if many roads were possible, then the road you're on starts to feel like your responsibility. And that's the twist. The fear of freedom does not prove freedom is bad. It proves your life matters to you. Anxiety is not always a malfunction. Sometimes anxiety is what it feels like to stand in front of an open future and realize your actions count. Søren Kierkegaard described something like this as the dizziness of freedom. And dizziness is the perfect word, because freedom can feel like standing at the edge of many possible lives. You could step this way, you could step that way. You could stay exactly where you are. But nothing removes the fact that it's your step. You see this in love. You say you want honesty. Then the moment comes to be honest, and your chest tightens. Why? Because honesty does not only risk losing someone, it also ends the comfort of pretending you never chose. Once you speak, your values become visible. The relationship becomes real, or the fantasy breaks. You see it in work too. You say you feel trapped by your job, your path, your label, and maybe you are. But part of the trap is that leaving would force you to meet yourself. What do you actually want? What kind of difficulty are you willing to carry? What dream is yours? And what dream did you borrow because it protected you from deciding? You even see it in silence, not because nothing is there, but because something is there. Your own unfinished choices, your own role in the shape of your days. That is why distraction is so seductive. It protects you from the open space where responsibility starts speaking. But responsibility is not the same as blame. This matters. Blame says, everything is your fault. Responsibility says, this life is in your hands now, at least in part, and your next action still matters. That is a harder message, but it is also a kinder one. Because if everything were fixed, effort would mean nothing, apologies would mean nothing, change would mean nothing, becoming would mean nothing. Would you really want a life where none of your choices had weight? So maybe the goal is not to escape the fear of freedom. Maybe the goal is to listen to it. The next time you feel yourself drifting, scrolling, avoiding, delaying, ask one question. What am I choosing by not choosing? That question cuts through the fog. Because delay is also a decision. Silence is also a move. Avoidance is also a path. And repetition is a vote for the person you are rehearsing. You do not need total control. You do not need perfect clarity. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You only need honesty for one step, then another. Freedom is scary because it asks you to stop waiting for life to happen to you. It asks you to notice that your smallest actions are already making a life. What scares you is not choice alone, it is that freedom makes you responsible. And maybe that is exactly why it can return you to yourself.